Well, in international news now, the United Nations says renewed armed attacks in northern Mozambique have displaced thousands of people, further straining humanitarian operations. According to the UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, nearly 47,000 people were displaced from 3 northern districts by the end of July. SABC's Isaac Lucando reports for us.
Recent attacks by armed groups have severely impacted 3 districts in northern Mozambique, Chiure, Ancoabe and Miudumbe. Chiure has been the hardest hit, with around 42,000 people forced to flee. More than half of them are children. Displaced families are reported living in overcrowded, unhygienic conditions, with many children separated from their parents or traveling alone. The UN says that growing insecurity has forced many to flee without identification documents, making it harder for them to access basic services and limiting their freedom of movement. Humanitarian assistance remains underfunded. Of the $352 million requested for aid, only $66 million has been received so far. The UN warns that without urgent funding, the situation could deteriorate further. Mozambique continues to face overlapping challenges, including conflict in the north, climate-related disasters, and recurring outbreaks of diseases like cholera. Isaac Lucando, SABC, Dar es Salaam.
All right, Professor Adriano Nuvunga is a director of the Center for Democracy and Human Rights in Mozambique, and he joins us now. Prof, a very good afternoon to you. We are hearing staggering numbers, Prof, of ordinary citizens in Mozambique being impacted due to this violence. I mean, the UN is reporting, as we've heard in that report, that nearly 47,000 people were displaced from those 3 northern districts in July alone. Perhaps let's start with what exactly is driving this violence in northern Mozambique.
Thank you very much. Well, the violence in Cabo Delgado, northern Mozambique, is driven by a complex web of factors. At its core, it stems from a long history of state neglect, extreme poverty, youth unemployment, and a sense of marginalization among local populations, particularly in Muslim-majority coastal areas. This has created a fertile ground for the emergence of an insurgency that claims affiliation with the Islamic State, but whose root causes are deeply local. So the insurgency, it exploits frustration with governance failures, land dispossession, and lack of access to opportunities. So the violence is no longer just an insurgency. It has evolved into a crisis of human insecurity, with armed actors, including state and foreign actors, to be implicated in human rights violations.
And I want to stay on that point of foreign actors, Prof. I mean, when you factor in that Cabo Delgado is rich in a number of minerals, gas and other resources, just speak to us about how, you know, that has shaped or even worsened this conflict. In other words, the kind of role economic interests at play here, and who stands to benefit?
Absolutely. I mean, the discovery of vast natural gas reserves and other minerals such as rubies and graphite has not brought development to local populations. Instead, it has deepened existing inequalities and fueled resentment. Communities have been displaced without adequate compensation to make way for these mega projects, often managed by foreign companies with limited local participation and oversight. The promise of wealth has attracted powerful interests, and the competition to control resource zones has intensified. But the reality is that economic interests, both local elites, Maputo-centric, Cabo Delgado, Pemba-centric elites, and international players have a stake in maintaining the current status quo, even if it comes at the expense of peace and accountability. This undermines a coordinated humanitarian response, as access to information, security, and affected communities is often politically manipulated. So straight to your question, here, the international interests and the local elites, I mean Cabo Delgado, but also the Maputo-centric elites are the ones who are benefiting without any sort of development and opportunities for local communities. This is one of the key drivers of this conflict.
What avenues or actions then are there, to hold non-state armed groups accountable for violations of humanitarian law, or anyone that has a part of it? I mean, particularly in the region like Cabo Delgado, where these groups have shown a blatant disregard for civilian lives. I mean, we're talking upwards of about 100,000 people displaced just this year alone.
Absolutely. I mean, if you look at the issue of the responsibility to protect, which is a key concept and framework that has been used internationally, but when it comes to Africa and Cabo Delgado particularly, it has been inconsistently applied, often depending on geopolitical interest and international will. And Cabo Delgado more specifically, I mean, this it has failed to gain traction due to a number of reasons, starting from the conflict refusing to classify the situation as a humanitarian crisis, framing it instead as a counter-terrorism operation. And this has fueled the conflict further instead of addressing it from a dialogue perspective, relating it to the domestic root causes to the problem. So failing to frame it that way and framing it as a counter-terrorism operation, it has fueled further the conflict, affecting local populations who are the biggest victim of all what is happening. Double victim. Number one, no economic opportunities, no benefit of the economic and natural resources boom. And secondly, from a lack of coordinated humanitarian, which is also affected by how government has been framing it, not as humanitarian crisis, but as a counter-terrorism operation.
And very quickly, Prof, as we wrap up, I mean, there is concern, of course, that this particular conflict is not treated as we see in places that also battle with humanitarian crises, like in the Middle East. Are regional bodies like the African Union and SADC doing enough to address conflicts that we are seeing in Mozambique, as an example?
They have tried. We had SADC deploying SAMIM to help Mozambique address the security challenge in northern Mozambique, understanding that if the situation escalates, it will also affect the region. But governance failure in Mozambique made SADC and SAMIM especially to leave the area, to abandon Cabo Delgado. And that has weakened the regional and continental use of these mechanisms to strengthen Mozambique's capacity to respond to the situation. What we see is Rwandese, which are present there, in contracts which are not clear, not transparent to the Mozambican public, the extent to which they are there, the terms of their deployment, and other international forces with clear, opaque governance structures. So there is a great deal of opacity and poor governance. And let's be honest here, leadership also, it has failed from the Mozambique side to set governance right for a proper response to the situation in northern Cabo Delgado.
Prof, appreciate your time. Thank you so much for speaking to us. Professor Adriano Nuvunga, the Director of the Center for Democracy and Human Rights in Mozambique, just looking at the situation on the ground in Mozambique as the UN is reporting and, concerns, of course, about further straining humanitarian operations there, saying that close to 47,000 people have been displaced in July alone.